Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show in which we explore the mystery of the human personality through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, producer of the show. Thrilled to have you here with us today. We've got a great guest and good friend, Rebecca Lyons. She's written a book called A Surrendered Yes. And we get into this idea of surrender and acceptance. What is it? How do you do it? The power of acceptance. We talk about anxiety and control today. What is it? How do you deal with anxiety? We talk about each Enneagram type's relationship to time. Did you know that each Enneagram type has a specific relationship to time? 3 different types relate more to the past, 3 relate more to the present, and 3 are more focused on the future. We talk about that, uncover that a bit. So lots of great things that we discussed today. I know you're going to love Rebecca. Again, her book is A Surrendered Yes. That's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And without any further ado, here is the host of our show, Ian Cron.
Rebecca Lyons, welcome to Typology.
Thank you so much for having me.
Enneagram 4, author of the new book, A Surrendered Yes, 52 devotions to let go and live free.
Yep.
We were just laughing because for those of you who know Enneagram 4s, we had to caution each other against talking for the next 3 hours, exploring our deep existential questions and angst.
Exactly. We had a little pre-call and we're like, we're going to need to keep the timer running.
Well, and that's true because I'm so fascinated by this topic, and it resonates actually with my sort of current spiritual experience. And the whole idea of surrender and acceptance and moving through the world with open hands has long been an important experiential idea, if I can put those words together.
Yeah.
For me. Both as a human being, as a person in recovery, those are themes that are terribly important. And so I really want to jump into that with you because I think every type is going to learn a lot and indirectly learn a lot about Enneagram 4s simply by listening to the texture and the colors of conversation that are between us. Okay, give us a short précis of the book.
Right. So it's kind of been a journey of my life of surrender. And I think all of us, surrender is an invitation for all of us, but we can run from it or we can accept it. And so that's why I love that you're talking about acceptance so much, because I think surrender is accepting what is. And that's the first step to recovery in all stages of whatever it is our angst looks like, but really being honest with what is. And so I would say a very tangible expression of surrender began for me in my 20s when my firstborn was born at 26, and 6 hours later, the doctor comes in. I'm completely drugged. It was emergency C-section. He was only 4.5 pounds full term. And I just remember still coming off the anesthesia because they accidentally gave me 2 epidurals. So that's a whole nother story for another day. I couldn't even walk for a couple days. But 6 hours later, I'm completely almost passed out, hadn't held him yet. And they said, we see signs of Down syndrome in your baby. So that is what is. And I remember it took about a week for that genetic testing to come back, but that was my entree to motherhood. And so that was a surrender. I mean, obviously there was grief attached to that. There was an acceptance that life for my firstborn son did not look as planned, even up to the day prior to delivery. And I think wrestling with surrender, wrestling that to the ground requires a whole lot of submission. Just like surrender just means this is now the new reality. And I remember thinking I was so afraid of the unknown, but the truth is in all of parenting is unknown. And so it just kind of helped remind me that while this looked different than the journey you thought it would look like your entire pregnancy, I did have a faith that held me, that also promised that God would still be there that whole time, that he'd be walking with me, that there would be a grace for every day. And some days I felt that more than others. I would say I had an ugly cry again at 6 months and then another one at a year, because every milestone kind of reveals that I still expect things that aren't deliverable. And then I kind of have to have that conversation with God of going, okay, so this isn't just a one surrender thing as his mama. This is going to be, so far now, he's 20 years old now. This is a 20-year surrender. In fact, I had this again with God, like a year ago during COVID, he was having his hardest year ever. I was starting to see signs of OCD under the autistic spectrum. He was hitting himself, pushing his head against like glass. He was nonverbal, very frustrated. He kept pointing to his head. And so we were doing everything in our power to help him. And I just remember walking in the woods one day. We have a trail off the back of our home. It was like probably week 7 of quarantine. So we're all just sitting around looking at each other. And I just remember saying, God, are you going to lift this? I was mad. I was like, I understood surrender 20 years ago, but now he's 20 years old. He's a man. He doesn't have agency to even tell us fully what he's struggling with. We feel powerless to help him. Doctors aren't really giving us a lot of answers. And I said, are you going to lift this? I was just mad. And I just honestly, I hate to say it, but I heard God say, not audibly, but I just heard in my spirit, not yet. But I heard also, but I'll be here for as many wailing walks as you need. And so it was almost like, I'm not saying that I'm going to lift this currently, and I'll jump to the end of the story here in a second, but I am promising this withness. And I think that's what makes surrender bearable. So if you're a person of faith or you're not, to me, what makes surrender bearable is that there's something beyond myself that's holding all things together, and I can trust it. And if it's left to me to kind of carry this, I'm going to continue to spiral. But when I can point to something beyond me, then that's a tethering. And so there was a comfort even in the, I'm going to be with you. And here we are a year later from that moment. And a lot of things actually have lifted for him. We got him on the right medication. He's actually better regulated. He's smiling a lot more. I remember telling Gabe a couple months ago, I was like, I feel like we're getting our son back. And it was like a release of like, expecting that maybe we were already looking up dementia, like how early does that begin in Down syndrome, because typically that's not until your 40s. So we're just having to that is the journey. I just think we don't choose surrender, but it chooses us. And so I can accept that, and I can live into that, and I can grow from that, or I can just push against it and be an angry, resentful person. And so that was in my 20s. A decade later, in my 30s, we moved to New York. I started having panic attacks. That was a new season of surrender that was more about mental health, because my dad had suffered from the same thing when he was about my age at that time. And I watched that in high school and college and my early 30s. And then I would say this last surrender is like almost every decade, I would say, is when we said yes to adopting Joy 3 years ago. She was 5.5, but at 4 months abandoned at a police station in Guangzhou, China. She also has a Down syndrome diagnosis, and within a year we brought her home. So I think even with surrendering her, that was another ultimatum with God, where I said, if you want this to happen, I need you to put her right in front of me, and I'll name her Joy. And then 2 years later, I get a text of a girl in China with Down syndrome, and my friend, and I said, she's beautiful. What's her name? Why are you doing this to me? It's kind of one of those things, like, I know I give God these ultimatums, but I'm not really serious fully. I'm just not sure I'm ready for it. And she says, well, she came to me in the middle of the night with a baby that was having a terrible heart defect and needed surgery immediately. She actually doesn't have a heart defect, but I saw like a lostness in her eyes, but I knew there was a spark there, and I renamed her Chara, Chara. And I said, okay, great. So you mean the Greek word for joy? And she said, yes. So it's not only that I say to God, I need you to put her right in front of me. I also said, I'll rename her Joy, because I kind of kept saying in that season of mental illness, like, restore to me the joy of my salvation. I want joy back. And I wanted, like, even this daughter was a promise, a sign of that promise. And then God's like, not only am I going to put her in front of you, I'm going to actually change her name to Joy before you even meet her. And so now she's a part of our home. And so there's a surrender every day. And then there's big surrenders that change trajectory of your life. But I do think the more we surrender in the small and simple ways, that paves way for the bigger ones. That was a long answer. Just gave it all to you. We could be done now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so out of that emerges this book, which is actually a devotional. So it's not a long form prose book. I assume to help other people experience or surrender and acceptance in their own lives by using prompts, right?
Right.
And
right.
questions for journaling and
essays, examples.
Yeah.
everyday examples. Yeah.
So what a great service.
Oh, thank you. It's just, I think it's just a daily thing. I think sometimes we put too much pressure around the idea of surrender. Like it's just, it could look like life altering moments for sure. Moving across the country, shifting careers, growing your family. But honestly, it's really just a posture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you were talking, it made me think of really it's a practice, right? It's not like a one-time thing or a two-time thing. It's a daily practice. Because I was thinking, until you surrender to hurt, you can't find healing. The fear is largely about surrendering control. When you surrender to your loneliness, it helps you reach out for a relationship. It's a practice.
Yeah, even confession itself is surrender. You're getting something out of your head or out of your heart, and you're putting it out there. You're releasing something that almost brings clarity every time. And it does, as a result, also bring healing.
Yeah, I've often told the story of a spiritual director I had who once challenged me as a 4. I was all down in my darkness and complaining about all manner of things associated with my past and my life. And he said to me at one point, he said, "Ian, these are the cards. This is your life. What's the invitation?" And I didn't understand that last question until he explained that, embedded in every circumstance, there is a divine invitation to move into some new place. And I would count in it, among other things, a place of acceptance and surrender. And, I think one of the things that causes suffering is resistance to suffering.
Exactly.
Right? It's like those who refuse to suffer most, in the words of Montaigne. And so, everything in us wants to push away suffering. All of us want to grasp pleasure and
power
and avert pain.
Yeah.
But ironically, the place of happiness and joy is in this posture of acceptance and surrender. And I like what you say, to the way the world is. And this is the way the world is. And I've met so many people who unconsciously fight against the past. For example, I refuse to believe this happened to me. I refuse to accept that this is how I was raised, or this happened to me, or that happened to me. It's like, well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of energy. That's a lot of work, right? When if you can just sort of say, it ain't personal.
Right.
If someone else had been in my shoes, the same thing would have happened to them.
Right.
And if we can just accept, and when you do, Anthony, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but you just feel this constriction. I mean, I think somatically, when we're fighting reality, you can feel it in the body. Right. It's like you're all pinched inside. That feeling of just being pinched. Yeah. And then when you let go, there's this like dilation in the chest, and you just kind of open and you exhale this relief,
because so much of it is about the denial of reality, really. Yeah. So you're spending all this energy trying to keep this thing submerged, and surrender is accepting the cards, like you're saying.
Well, and even one of the most obvious physical symptoms of stress is shallow breathing, right? It's the first thing the brain is doing when the amygdala is going off and you're in that fight, flight, or freeze. You literally can't get a deep breath. And I remember doing a study before my last book, Rhythms of Renewal, and that's all about trading stress and anxiety for peace and purpose. And the American Institute of Stress said 4 out of 5 of us, so 77% of us have physical symptoms of stress. That was pre-global pandemic, by the way. So, but the point is that shallow breathing, those racing thoughts, those sleepless nights, a mind that won't quit, really is all of us trying to manage our pain. And the way we manage it is by suppressing it.
Right. And addictions, by the way. Right. Is a very efficient form of pain management.
Right.
Though it creates more pain in the end.
Exactly.
Right.
It's that temporary release for a much costlier long-term problem.
So angst.
Yeah.
You've had a share.
Yeah.
You're a 4. You understand
angst.
And
I don't know what you're talking about.
So here's the thing I hope people realize as we're talking. It's very easy to just say, okay, these are 4s. This is what they're like, and just describe them. And I would challenge people who are listening to think, to be a little bit more intentional and listen to the quality of conversation. Like the quality of this conversation is different than one I would have with a 1 or a 7 or a 9, right? The energy would be different. The choice of vocabulary will be different. The topics of interest will be different. The things that grab our attention. And then, as Helen Palmer says, wherever your attention goes, energy follows.
Right.
Right. And so this is where the attention of 4s go.
Yeah.
And then part of it then defines to some degree the vocation of the type.
Yeah.
Like part of our thing is, how do we help people with themes like surrender, acceptance, angst, anxiety, depression, fear? This is what we're good at.
Right.
This is
kind of
what
our
4s do.
superpower
It
because
is.
we have felt those same exact things, and you have empathy. Like I've heard you say before, empathy is our superpower. It is truly, I can't not have empathy. I mean, I just can't even engage somebody without putting myself in their shoes on some level, because I feel like I've experienced some version of whatever their loss or longing looks like.
Right. So we're doing a thing actually tonight on anxiety and how each type gets triggered, I think, into anxiety, and also stress, and the ways that we cope with it, and how are some better ways we can engage to cope with it. And so you've had this journey of anxiety and depression, all these different things that are very common to 4s. I mean, I always tell people, I've never met a 4 that didn't need to be in therapy. I just never have.
Right.
I've just never. We just have too much emotional stuff happening.
My husband says we all need therapy. You're just more aware of it.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
One day I remember a year ago, I'm just broken. He's like, babe, we're all broken. You're just more aware of it.
Yeah.
I love that.
And
That's true.
that's coming from an 8.
I think about, go ahead.
Who's worked on empathy with me.
I was going to say, part of the way I think about the gift that we have as 4s.
Are you a 4 as well?
I'm a 4 as well.
Oh my goodness, this is a trifecta. I love it. I'm like, you are really speaking up. Are you a 4 as well? I love it.
But we all experience darkness, but the way that we encounter darkness, I think it allows us to mine for pearls that then we bring back with us that help other people that may not go spend the time trying to dig underneath what the darkness is about.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we get to experience maybe highs and lows that others don't, so we can bring back treasure and help people along the way.
And I think what I have found that's been such a gift is having language. I think being able to offer the gift of language for someone who's like, I can't make sense of this, but everything you're saying is resonating to my core. So you're almost given the gift of voice.
Yeah.
To share with someone else who is in the pit, right? Like who is just in the center of whatever their dark night of the soul looks like. And they're going, well, she still seems to be standing, or he still seems to be standing, and they actually seem to be thriving or healthy, or like they're not ashamed of that journey. They're not trying to hide it or bury it. That pain has become purpose. And I think that's an encouragement for anyone. And so I take great joy in going, hey, if any little morsel of my journey or your journey can help encourage someone that you're not alone and this is not the end of your story, then we can keep going. And you really do have something to offer someone else, because there's always going to be someone right next to you or near you who's just a few steps behind where you are that needs that dose of courage that you are exhibiting.
Yeah. But, here's the thing about acceptance and surrender, in my experience. It's not something you can manufacture.
No.
There's no button. You know what I mean? There's no surrender button where we can go, doink,
There's no strategy.
There's
for
no
surrender.
strategy. And, here's been my experience of what has really helped me is as often as I can live in this rhythm. And I know that daily rhythms are so important to you as a major theme in your work, right? In fact, one of your books was Rhythms of Renewal, right? So, I mean, you have to, I think the only thing we can do is set the table to experience surrender and acceptance. And it may not come as quickly as we'd like, right?
Right.
And so for me, a daily rhythm is just one of contemplation and meditation. Now, some people would call it centering prayer in the Christian tradition. Others, and maybe even in an atheist community, might call it mindfulness meditation, whatever it is, which is to really come before your higher power, God, Jesus, whatever your thing is, right? And I say that because some of our audience don't self-identify as
Sure.
Christians. I think that for me, just shutting up and actually making a point of quieting my discursive, busy mind, and in some way opening myself up to what Thomas Keating calls divine therapy.
Yeah.
It's as if to say, God, I have nothing to say here.
Yeah.
I am done talking. And all I'm going to do is quiet the mind, focus on my breath, maybe use a prayer word or not, and trust that in the silence that you are working in the background, rewiring, repairing, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like doing,
Healing, yes.
doing some kind of maintenance work on the system. You know, I don't
right.
want to use,
Yeah.
mechanic language for a human part, but
Yeah.
what's your daily rhythm then for cultivating
Yes.
a space in which surrender is most likely going to happen?
Yeah, I have several, but I would say probably the top one every morning. I live in Franklin, so we used to be neighbors. We're not too far from each other now in Nashville and Franklin, but we have a front porch and I can see more animals than people. So I'll just stop there. And I used to live in Manhattan, so one of these things is not like the other. But I sit on the porch like every day this summer, first thing in the morning, watch the sunrise. I'm usually up around 5 or 6, and it's not because I'm, I just, whatever, I have to wake up when the sun comes up. But all that to say, I'll just sit out there. And I would say in the past, I used to think like, I need to get through this book in the next 2 days, or I want to journal these 3 pages immediately. And I have felt more prompted to just be and listen to the birds wake up and just like look out. It's a really pretty view because it's just, you see the fog rising when the sun comes up, and Tennessee's just really pretty. Can we just say that?
Yeah.
And so as a result, I'm just kind of soaking in the beauty of nature and creation and watching everyone wake up. And there's a real grace in that, to just be in it and enjoy it, like actually enjoy it and not feel like I need to say something or offer something, but just receive. And Kurt Thompson, he writes a lot about shame and his new book, The Soul of Shame, but then he also writes a new book coming out called The Soul of Desire. And it's all about how when we're seen and known and loved in the absence of shame, we can create beautiful things. And it's all about that connection of desire with beauty. And I do find that when I'm in a healthier place and I'm not condemning myself or second guessing things or living in regret, I can actually have the ability to dream again and recover those passions and feel that natural momentum of creativity.
Right. So you're married to Gabe. He's an 8. And one thing I want to point out to people is that each of us has, let's say superpowers, right? Each type. But certain types are not naturally self-reflective.
Right.
8s are not naturally self-reflective people.
I've learned that.
Yeah. Lots of 7s are not naturally self-reflective people. Lots of people are so other referenced, like 1s, 2s, and 6s. They're out. So there's the focus is outwardly placed. Whereas like 4s, 5s, and 9s are very inwardly focused people. They're self-referencing, right? And we have so much to learn from each other. Like I'm often, I'm 60 now, so I've gotten a little bit better, although like this year, I've wondered if I have made massive steps backwards in some ways, but whatever. And so I have to learn to be more other referencing.
Yes.
Others need to learn to be more self-reflective. And it's a harder climb, right? So I think that's one of the benefits of daily rhythms. Like it's easy for me to go sit on the porch like you, sit, reflect, do all that stuff, journal, wonder about my inner world,
Exactly.
where it's my place in the grand scheme of the universe.
Right.
And 8s are like, they get up in the morning, they're like, give me some food, I'm going to go conquer something. You know what I mean? It's like,
yes, absolutely.
Right.
And I'm like, how do you wake up and you're just running and you're doing all these things and you're moving, like you're moving the ball down the court and it's like effortless for you. And I'm like, my mind just wants to explode watching you get on your laptop like that early in the morning. And it's like effortless. And you're at peace with holding it all. And it just makes me want to completely spiral. So I do think it's really good to be paired. It's not we're both passionate people, so I wouldn't say that it's like an easy thing. Like we both feel very strong about our passions, and sometimes they complement very well, and sometimes we just see something differently, and we're just going to go toe to toe. And I've learned that even in the kind of both of us being true to who we are, could look like fighting, but really it's us just going like, I want to hear you, and I also want to be heard, and I want us to sit in the tension of something and not give up and walk away.
Or do something necessarily.
Right. And so I think it's been such a maturing thing, obviously, for both of us. We're at 24 years, and knowing that no marriages are easy, ever. But yet there's a point of being together that like hones and rounds us out, which is, I think, extremely important.
Yeah. Someone once said to me that that your partner is the central agent of your sanctification.
It's true.
Right?
It's true.
I mean, that
100%.
You know, in some ways, you're living with the enemy of your ego, right?
Who sees everything,
Yeah,
right?
who sees absolutely everything. Okay, let's talk about anxiety for just a
Okay,
moment, because I think it's something everybody struggles with. Most floors I know have at some point or another struggled with depression. And we seem to be particularly susceptible to it.
And why do you think that is?
You know, I think part of it is this longing for some unnameable thing that we sense that we're missing.
Yeah.
I think fours and all three types in the heart triad really struggle with shame.
Yep.
The feeling of not enoughness.
Yep.
I think fours and ones both struggle a great deal with the inner critic.
Yes.
And so, as you know, all those things in concert with one another could create depression.
For sure.
Right. And
yes.
does that resonate with you? All those
100%.
Things?
And I always sometimes resonate a lot with a one because of that demand for excellence that helps compensate for not being enough, and that inner critic that kind of yells at you if you didn't give it your 100%. And yet I also I feel for people who like sit in that place, and here's my question though, because if I understand correctly, like a healthy four integrates to a one. Is that correct?
To the healthy side of one.
Yeah. So then I'm kind of going, how is that? How does that work? Because if the one is the reformer and the perfectionist, how does that play out? Because I'm trying to think of myself in my health, right? At a four who's thriving, what part of the one is coming out for me?
Well, I think it's number one, ones live in the present.
Yes, that's good.
It's what's in front of them that needs to get done. Fours tend to live in the past.
Okay.
So their orientation to time is different.
Okay.
And I'm increasingly fascinated by the orientation to time of each type. So for those listening, ones, twos, and sixes tend to live in the present. Fours, fives, and nines in the past. Threes, sevens, and eight in the future. So this could cause tension in your marriage, right?
Yes.
Because your husband, Gabe, is very future oriented.
Yes, he is.
Which doesn't mean you're not. It just means that you lean more into the past than the future or the present.
Well, and I'm like conflicted because I'm a three wing. So I can wing in the future, live in the present, and then also be obsessed with the past.
Well, and again, all of us have all three orientations to time. It's just one captures our attention more than the other two. And I think part of the journey to health is balancing our orientations to time.
Yeah.
And not have them be so out of whack.
Sure.
Right. And I to your point, I mean, I think obviously that when you're too future oriented, you can create a lot of anxiety about things you can't control or don't know. If you live in the past, there's a lot of regret.
Yep.
Right. The attention tends to migrate toward the negative.
Right.
Right. Because human beings, whether we like it or not, have a negativity, a negativity bias. And so I think that that one thing is a little bit different. I mean, well, specific to your question, they're doers. They're in the present. They get stuff done. They get stuff done excellently. Fours tend to live in their imaginations for a long time and fantasize about doing things like
Sure.
writing the next great play, writing the next book, doing this, doing, and they
Sure.
have great, incredible creative ideas, but sitting down, getting organized, and actually executing is sometimes a problem for fours.
Okay. Yeah. that makes
Maybe
total
less
sense.
for fours with a 3-wing, but we can get lost. Like when I'm researching a book, I go forever.
Yes.
And I'm stewing in this thing of like wild creativity and imagining, and some of it's grandiose and some of it is just a passion for learning. And, whereas an 8 is like, sit down, pick up the laptop, just write the dang book. Right. And you're like,
absolutely. That's why Gabe's on one member of my editorial support team.
you know what? My editor's a 1.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so I lean on 1s a lot,
Yeah.
to help me with the actual execution and the excellence piece. I think the difference between 4s and 1s, though, is that one is that the 4 is more idea. Well, how do I want to say this? The 4 is always the 1. I think suffers from the feeling that whatever their effort is, falls short of being right. And I think the 4's obsession is more about the failure to meet an ideal.
Right.
And they kind of look the same, and they can both trigger an inner critic, but they're really two different things. It's like the 4 is looking for Plato's, the Platonic ideal. Like, that's what I want to accomplish. And then they're always feeling disappointed
Yeah.
that they didn't. That looks kind of 1-ish, but
Yeah.
it's different.
So that critic comes from a different lens. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that you say the healthy 4 integrates to the 1 that gets things done. And I think that's why sometimes my team at work is always like, you think you're a 4 with a 3-wing, but we see a 3 with a 4-wing, right? Like they definitely see, like, it's weird how you can have that creative existential place and just kind of get lost in it, and then you kind of put the other hat on and you go to work and you're like, these are the initiatives, I really care about results, we need to feel like this is moving the ball somewhere. And I think sometimes even for a type 4, that can even feel conflicting, because you're like, how did I go from here to here in a matter of 2 hours from sitting on the front porch?
Yeah.
Like holding those tensions
Yeah.
of achievement or a need for achievement, as well as a need for vulnerability and authenticity. Sometimes it feels like two sides of your brains kind of wrestling back and forth.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But
That's,
I have 2 parents, one that exhibited one and one that exhibited the other. So I think I grew up with holding that tension. But even as an adult, it's interesting to I sometimes feel like my head's a little bit like a ping pong ball. It's like going back and forth on.
We've talked about that a good bit, where the 3, projects this image and then is tortured by the 4 part of themselves that is seeking authenticity.
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
like, I don't know if that's what I really wanted to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Well, and then also I think one of the things people don't understand about the Enneagram is we tend to be a little bit black and white and sort of view it statically, when I don't think that's helpful. If the Enneagram were a circle versus that 9, pointed geometric figure, I always think of it as a color wheel. Right. And so if, 3 is red and 4 is yellow, what do you get when you put red and yellow together? I don't remember, but whatever that color
Orange?
is.
Orangish.
Yeah. So in between those 2 numbers, right, there are shades. And I think some people don't just like inhabit the single space. It's like they can get sort of that somewhere between 3 and 4. And maybe it's a continuum and it kind of pings back and forth a little bit.
Yeah.
But that central motivation remains the same.
Right. And I think even different seasons of life, kind of what that surrender moment looks like for you in that particular season can kind of toggle where you land in that color wheel, as far as like how much red or how much yellow. Because I do think when, I look at those catalytic seasons that shifted the trajectory of my life, that did look a lot like suffering, 4 was like front and center. Like I wasn't trying to hide or make excuses for. It was like the surrender of just release and constantly just confession and just like I want to learn from this. I don't want this to be a wasted season where I shove it down and then I'm paying the price for the next decade. I want to embrace it fully. And then I also think that like sometimes the other side of that, where that I start to have language for that, I'm more talking about that from this was a learning experience. This is what this looked like. And that takes shape in a book or a podcast or whatever. Then that feels a little bit more like I'm now giving myself some actionable steps that came out of that season. And so that's how I kind of see that continuum working for me.
That's good.
So I'm thinking about I have been thinking obviously about anxiety lately, and which is maybe for our sake is this vague feeling of uncertainty, of apprehension about something going wrong, something going off the rails. And sometimes I think it's just, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, anxiety used to save us on the Serengeti. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you really needed anxiety if you wanted to live.
There's a healthy fear.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
Right.
A healthiness to fear.
But we don't need the level of anxiety that we used to need
Right.
on the Serengeti, and yet we're still carrying it
Exactly.
from, 10,000 years ago, although there's plenty in the environment to make us anxious. It's not like we're about to be attacked by a lion, right? So it seems to me that for as a way of coping with anxiety, and I too went through a season in college and then in my late 20s, panic attacks, depression. The panic attacks and anxiety was actually a feature of the depression, right? My way of coping was really substances. And so I try not to be too hard on myself. It's sort of
Yeah.
like, well, man, you found something, and
Yeah.
everybody finds
Trying to get through.
something, right? And so it seems to me that one of the ways that I've learned to cope with anxiety and to find a place of surrender and acceptance is actually in that time of meditation, right? It's like rather than push anxiety away, it's actually to fully experience it. To actually enter into it. What color is it? What's its texture? What is its heat? Right? And it's like actually fully go there and then realize that it's just a story.
Yeah.
It's a story the mind is telling. It's not who you are.
Right.
It's not your identity. It's like, it's just a thing that's
It's not forever.
Yeah.
it's not forever. It's just something moving through, and that when it's ready, it will be done with you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I was on an airplane the other night flying from Atlanta to here, and the pilot. Now, I'm not a scared or frightened flyer, but I'm an uneasy flyer.
Okay. I get that.
Right.
I
Not-
had my first panic attack on an airplane.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yes.
I'll remember that
I
the
mean-
next time. And so it's just a slight buzz, It's like when you have a fluorescent light that's buzzing
Yeah.
in the background.
That white noise.
That white noise in the background. And the pilot comes out into the first class cabin. He's standing in front with the mic, looking at the whole plane. He goes, so we're going to have some turbulence between here and Nashville. It's going to be pretty darn bumpy. And so I'm going to ask the attendants to sit throughout this brief flight. We're going to be going around storms. I mean, I don't know what he thought he was doing.
The fact that he addressed you personally versus over like his little microphone.
Yes.
That's next level.
Yeah, but it was actually a little bit worse because it's like,
Yeah.
if this guy has to come out of the car.
Well,
I know
didn't
that's
need to
my
prepare me
point.
this
That's my
way.
point. You're like,
Yeah.
he's not joking around.
No,
Like,
this is going to be
This
really
is
bad.
legit.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm on the plane. I'm like, and so what did I do? I just said, well, I surrender. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
It's like, this is the way the world is right now. Just right now. This is the way the world is.
Yep.
And might be uncomfortable, might be this or that, but I'm watching the morning show, and between here and wherever, it will be what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And but during the flight, we're going. We have about 2 minutes of what I would call a couple of bumps. Then the rest of the dang flight was soft air,
Yeah.
completely
See?
smooth.
Yeah.
I think that's a metaphor for all of life.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I thought.
Yes, it's going to be the worst. The world is on fire. It's apocalyptic. Our heads are gonna explode.
Right.
And then what real anticipation is always greater than reality. And that's what happened the day I got Kate's diagnosis 20 years ago. I was like, I have a child with Down syndrome. He's not gonna have friends. He's not gonna speak. I'm not gonna know how to help him. Like, of course, everyone then tells you all their stories of their kids who are 15, 20, 25. You're like, that's really not helpful because I have a newborn. And so we even not only do we do it to ourselves. We tell it to other people, and we almost inject that anxiety onto, like, parents inject their anxiety onto their kids,
Right.
friends inject it onto each other. You're like, well, I hadn't thought about that, but thanks, and then all of a sudden with this like cesspool, I call it like a tsunami of fear. It's just overwhelmed and swallowed up a whole community, but also I think right now globally, I think there's a tsunami of fear that we either are like get caught in that riptide, or we paddle like heck to get away, because you can't live like that and be any agent of change or any agent of hope if you're swallowed up. And I'm just no good. I'm not helpful at all if I'm swallowed up. And so I think a lot of us have to be honest with, like, it could go this way. And maybe I love that we're talking about anxiety. And I wonder, like, you giving your very practical, like, I think almost the sooner we surrender to the anxiety, like the faster we can get to that point.
Yes.
And surrender to it. And I remember like coming out of those panic attacks on airplanes, because I thought it was God's sense of humor to then put me on a plane every week to talk about peace. I was like, oh, okay. So it's like mine was rooted in claustrophobia. And I just remember reading so much that, and the metaphor for that was of fear of being trapped and powerless in a circumstance, relationship, or situation that you have no agency to change. And so that's kind of what it reflects, claustrophobia. And so the combat to claustrophobia, and like every other phobia basically, is exposure, right? So bravery is moving scared. You actually have to step into the place and you retell yourself, like the story that you've been telling yourself, you reframe the story that you've told yourself is that if I'm stuck on this trapped elevator, I will die. Well, that's not true. So then I have to keep putting myself on an elevator every day. Thankfully, I still lived in New York City for 2 more years, and I lived in a building on the 7th floor. So even though the first 2 years of my time in New York, I couldn't even get on a plane, a train, an elevator, a subway, or walk in a crowd. Once I started to experience the peace of God and practice that daily, then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm going to get on this elevator every single day until it's not as scary as it was. And I might need my husband with me. I might need my kids with me. I might not be able to do it alone yet, but I'm going to keep stepping on that plane, and I'm going to keep stepping on that elevator. And like you said, you just chose to surrender immediately. That's what I did. I would just say, like, I started to feel a little anxiety. A couple years later, we were flying to Paris, and it was like my favorite place to go. And I was so excited. And the minute I got on that plane, I'm like, I'm going to be on this for a lot of hours, and all of a sudden I'm going to not be able to escape. And what I do, like, everyone has different practices, but I just keep going. Jesus, you're my peace. For my faith, I say, you're my peace, and I surrender and I submit to that, and I come under that covering of peace. It's not even like I'm trying to produce it for myself at all. I'm just recognizing you as peace, and I'm just going to submit to that peace. And so even that posture of surrender is more like I'm surrendering to something that's got a peaceful presence outside of myself, so that then gives me that place of receiving that versus me trying to muster it up or be enough or fight it on my own. And that just became kind of my rhythm of when I feel the panic, because panic gives you about 3 seconds when you know, like, it's coming, and then it's going to consume you. And a panic attack that consumes you is like the full bore. And so I've experienced that on planes, but then I was like, if I can head that off pretty quickly as I know it's coming by combating that with just saying, I surrender, or I submit, or I come under this covering of peace, then I'm shifting the narrative quickly. And it's almost like, if you think about, like, you're in a boxing ring and you've got kind of an ace that you use. It's more of one of prevention before you're on the ground.
So I love that. And then Anthony, do you know how long the actual length of a typical feeling is? 90 seconds.
Is it 90 seconds?
Yeah,
90
wow.
seconds.
Yeah, that feels right.
Right. So the actual any feeling generally lasts 90 seconds, whether it's road rage, anxiety, panic, sadness,
so
whatever. What lengthens the experience is the stories we tell ourselves about the feeling, right? That actually amplify and extend the experience of it.
Yeah, and
Right.
I've learned that every feeling is attached to a memory. So that memory tells us a story.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I got a panic attack last time when this happened, and then the time before that, and
Right.
then this is
That's
an
right.
airplane thing, and then I can never do this again, and I'm not going to fly anymore. I'm going to quit my job. And, it's like all of a sudden, a few seconds in, you've given so much power to this
That's right.
fear.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, do you have, I'm just curious, do you guys kind of have phrases? Because to me, I feel like to interrupt a thought, I have to speak out loud. It's like the words that come out of my mouth override the crazy in my brain. And so sometimes I'm like, this isn't true. Like sometimes I just have certain ways. Do you guys have ways that you combat that when your brain starts to
Yeah.
kind of loop with
For
a
me,
story?
it's just I've practiced, meditation and centering prayer for 30 plus years now. A lot of it's breathing. I'll just start totally focusing on my breathing, and then I love that you are reaching outside yourself for a different narrative, and that's what I do. I ask God to re-narrate my experience. So
yeah,
yeah.
that's good.
Story plays such a huge role
Yeah.
in our lives. We are, Dan McAdams at Northwestern University says the human personality is actually a story we tell ourselves about ourselves, right? And so, for me personally, I do what I said earlier based on my work with meditation, which is I just actually don't move away from the anxiety.
That's
I
good.
actually move right into the center of the storm.
That's good.
Yeah.
And then what I do then is I don't get hijacked by it.
Yeah.
What I would do rather is with curiosity and with kind of distancing, with a compassionate objectivity,
Yeah.
I'd sort of gaze right into the anxiety and go, well, hello. What's asking?
What brings you here?
Well, exactly.
Right.
Right. And it's like, well, I'm really scared. It's like, well, what could happen? It's like, well, I'm going to run up and down the aisles like Bart Simpson with my hair on fire, screaming. It's like, okay, maybe. Or I'm gonna have a heart attack. I won't be able to breathe. Whatever. Maybe. That might happen. And then what?
Yeah.
And then they're gonna have to drag me off the airplane on a gurney, and they're gonna take me to the hospital. And then what?
Right.
Right. It's just like
Yeah.
I just
Play
start
it
to
out.
gently inquire.
Yeah.
And then the more I just observe it compassionately and from a distance, not like I am anxious. It's like, oh, look, anxiety is here.
Yeah.
It's
good.
anxiety's visiting.
Well, and something
Yeah.
you've always said that I love is I'm the mountain, not the weather system.
Yes.
And
Right.
the anxiety
that
is
again?
I'm the
Sorry.
mountain, not the weather system.
Yes. That's
So
good.
the anxiety around me, it's the weather, and it's going to change any minute. But I'm the mountain.
Right. 90 seconds.
90 seconds.
Which,
See, we can
speaking
do
of
this.
90 seconds, we
can
have
do
less
hard
than that
things.
to close.
On that note, what a segue. That was beautiful.
Rebecca, thank you so much for being on Typology, author of the new book, A Surrendered Yes, Rebecca Lyons, 52 Devotions to Let Go and Live Free. Website, Rebecca, that's REBEKAH, Lyons, LYONS.com. Instagram, again, Rebecca Lyons. Facebook, the same. Twitter. And you can go to Amazon and pick up her new book, which is A Surrendered Yes. Rebecca, thanks for
having. This was the best. So much fun. I love you guys. Thank you for having me.
Thanks
Thank you.
for
We
being
love
on.
you too. Typology friends, listen up. May you have love. May you have joy. May you have peace. May you have healing. May you have rest. Much love. Until next time.